This week we're going to work on freeing up the engine in the Datsun and getting the fuel tank. So this week we're going to focus on the steps you would take if your barn find car, or the car that's been sitting a long time, has the engine seized up in it. So one of the first things you should do when looking at these vehicles, if they've been sitting a long time, is you should put a wrench on the crank pulley and try to turn it over by hand. Now, I've already done that. I did that on site when I first bought the vehicle. So I do know in this instance that the engine turns over. But I'm still going to go through the steps to make sure that the cylinder walls are lubricated and the piston rings are lubricated before I actually fire this car up for the first time. And it's really straightforward stuff. Stuff you can do at home, stuff you can actually do if you want to do it in the field when you're actually looking at the car. It's all very easy to do. It just takes a few simple hand tools to check this stuff out while you're looking at the car, and it can save you hundreds or thousands of dollars in the long run by checking this stuff out ahead of time. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to pull the spark plugs, and I'm just going to shine a flashlight down on the cylinders and take a look and see if I can see anything that jumps out at me. If it's real dark, if there's a bunch of oil, fluids, anything like that that's sitting in the cylinders. Like if the cylinders are full of water, that's a pretty good sign that the cylinders are already going to be rusted. But in this case, I have a little bit of history on the car. I know that it was fairly well taken care of as far as storage goes. So I'm not concerned about that, but I'm still going to take the steps to make sure that I don't have any damage, either the cylinder walls or the pistons, when I first go to fire this up for the first time. I'll set you guys up so you can see what I'm doing, but basically I'm going to move to the other side of the engine, pull the plugs, and I'm just going to shine a flashlight down in there and see what I can find out. You're at the point where you have the spark plugs out, and you can give them a visual inspection. These all look fairly good. They're a little dark, which means the carbs are probably running a little bit rich the last time it ran. I don't know if you can actually, if I can get the camera to focus on the end of the spark plug. There we go. So you can see they're all in about the similar condition. There's no broken electrodes. This one is worn down considerably, so I might just gap this one before I put it back in, because I don't want to spend any money on this that I don't have to until I know that this engine runs well. But just looking at them all, see if I can. So you can see that they're all in pretty decent condition. Again, a little bit dark. Now, one thing that I did find out about this engine is that the owner actually fogged the cylinders with oil when he went to store it. So that did a considerable amount of prevention to keep this engine in good shape. So what I'm going to do, even though the owner did fog these cylinders, is I'm going to put a little bit of Marvel Mystery Oil in each one of these cylinders, just to make sure that the rings, because I'm going to let this sit for a few days, I'm going to let that Marvel Mystery Oil penetrate beyond the rings, and hopefully, if there are any stuck rings, hopefully we get those freed up, and I'm sure they're going to have to be reseated once I get this engine actually running. Normally when you're doing this kind of a procedure, you're going to want the fluid that you put in the cylinders, whether it's ATF, Marble Mystery Oil, some kind of penetrating fluid, whatever you have. You're going to want that to sit and act for a while, especially if you go to rotate and it doesn't rotate, or if it goes just a little bit in either direction. You really want to fill those cylinders up and let it work. So in this instance, I was very fortunate that the previous owner took really good care of the car, even though he wasn't going to be using it. So that's a best case scenario for a vehicle like this. Now the fuel tank, on the other hand, the fuel tank is usually the place where you're going to find the most suffering and pain in your life, next to the engine. So in this instance, the fuel tank is here in the back of the vehicle, and the filler neck is also right on the rear panel. And this is days of well before the days of safety flaps and all that stuff. So we can actually get a view with the fuel cap off straight down into the filler neck and see what kind of condition our tank's in. And I've already pulled the fuel cap off and shined the flashlight down here, but you can see, hopefully you can see there's shiny metal down there and some other bits, which is probably a lot of dried fuel. So I'm going to pull the tank off. I'm going to do a home DIY cleanup on this job, and then once I get it off the car, there's a sender that we can pull out and see what kind of condition the tank is actually in. But I have a pretty good feeling that this tank, even though there's some dried fuel in it, is still going to be in really good condition. So let me get the rear end of this car up. Let's get the fuel tank out and see what we're working with. Lucky for me, and I kind of forgot this little tidbit of knowledge, but this fuel tank actually has a petcock built into it. So I can remove the petcock, which is this bolt right here, and drain whatever's left in the tank, or at least a majority of the nastiness, into a drain pan. And then I can let that drain pan sit outside and not worry about fuel fumes in here getting the best of me. So if you're working on fuel stuff, be smart. Don't like smoke or use a propane torch or stuff like that. Just be smart, because the fumes are what's explosive. It's not the liquid itself. So I'm going to go outside. I've got a drain pan that's got a little bit of gas in it already, sitting in my shed, away from the house, away from the garage. And so I'm going to go grab that, and I'm going to put it underneath here, and we'll open this petcock and see what kind of magic comes out of this thing. Well, that was a little anticlimactic. There was basically nothing left in the tank, so either this thing has a leak at one of the seams and it all came out, which is a possibility, or someone drained the fuel before they put it in storage, which is another possibility. Either way, the tank's got to come out so I can clean it, because it does look like there's some nasties in there. So that's the next step, is I'm going to lube up these crusty old bolts here. It's really simple to take one of these fuel tanks out. In a lot of cars it's very simple, especially older ones. Newer cars with the molded tanks, it's much more difficult. But here we've got two nuts on a stud that loosens up this hook, and then the straps come down and the tank comes out, and it's really that simple. So I'll pull this off. So I have to undo the hose clamp that holds it to the filler neck inside, and then it should come right out. It's pretty straightforward. So the fuel tank is now detached from the body, but I still have two fuel lines right up there in the front that I need to detach. So when you're taking stuff like this down, if you're not familiar with what's all the way around it, be careful, because if I break those hard lines, I'd have to replumb that fuel line all the way to the front of the vehicle. So I may still end up having to do that, but if I don't have to, that's a huge bonus. So I'm going to undo these fittings, and I'm going to go get this fuel tank out of here. At this point in the video, you are probably calling baloney on me, or bull feces, on this coming apart this easy. I have no idea why a 50-year-old car is coming apart like that. Like these J-hooks that hold the fuel tank in, like, these are 50 years old. These aren't like replaced, these aren't aftermarket. There's no reason that that should have come off without breaking or stripping or needing to be cut. Same thing with the lines that go to the fuel tank. They literally came off like they were put on there a year ago. I don't understand why. It's not that I have some magical penetrating fluid that I'm using on this. It's just an old can of WD-40 rust penetrating oil. I don't understand it. I'm not complaining. But it's certainly odd to me that this car is coming apart this easy. You should expect at some point in your process to break off bolts, strip bolts, something like that. I'm not having that experience yet, but I guarantee I'm going to. So with the good news of that coming off that easily, that tells me that the fuel tank, A, I didn't have to drain any really nasty stuff out of it. B, it came off the car super easy. So that tells me that it's probably in decent shape inside, but I need to get this fuel level sender out and see what I'm looking at inside. So that's next. That still has the Japanese stamping on it from 50 years ago, and it's hardly got any corrosion on it at all. Unbelievable. Even the lock ring came off without getting all deformed. So now that I look down in the tank here, I'm getting the first look, and it looks pretty good inside. I honestly think I could probably take this to the car wash and spray most of this crap out of this tank. Check this out. And you can see there's still... So you can see that there's still a little bit of fluid in the tank. But it's in really nice shape. I feel pretty good about that. So I'm going to pour the rest of this, whatever's in here, I'm going to pour it out into this, I'm going to say not so clean plastic jug I have here. And we'll see what, it doesn't, I mean, it smells bad. It smells like bad gas, but it doesn't smell that bad. So let's take a look at what's in the tank after however long it's been sitting without anybody using this car. You definitely would not want to run that through a carburetor or a fuel injection system. But I'm super pleased at how clean this tank is inside. I think the next step for me to do is I'm going to take it, I'm going to load it in the back of my pickup. Definitely don't want to transport this in my car, even though there wasn't much fuel in it. The fumes, still not worth the risk. So I'm going to put it in the back of my pickup, and I'm going to take it to the local car wash. And since there's not really, I've already drained the fuel out of it, I'm going to spray everything out, give it a good soaking, and run some degreaser through it. And then I'll come back and we'll put a heat gun on it for a while after it's rinsed out, and let's see how the tank looks after that. Back from the car wash, and the reason I went to the car wash is because they filter the water that goes into the drain, and it all goes back to the to get like taken care of properly. So none of the stuff that might have been in the tank would be like running down the street or anything like that, for those of you that are like environmentally conscious. So there's one more step to this procedure of making sure that our gas tank is thoroughly cleaned out, and that's to dry it. So now that we have a very nice clean inside gas tank, it's cold and nasty out. Now that our gas tank is clean inside and all the old fuel is out of it, the last thing to do is to dry it out. So to do that, we're actually just going to do it a very simple way. We're going to put a heat gun pointed down into the fuel tank. We're going to let it run for probably an hour, and then we'll take a look. That should be sufficient to dry everything out. We should have a nice, clean, dry fuel tank inside, and then we can inspect it and see where things are at. Alright, so I let the heat gun run until all the water on the outside of the tank had dried, and it didn't make it any warmer in the garage, that's for sure. So after it ran for about a half an hour, I touched the tank. It was warm to the touch. The condensation had stopped coming out of the vents in the tank, which kind of lets me know that it's dry inside. And it looks pretty good inside this tank. I'm super surprised at how well this turned out. So I'll show you what's going. I'll show you the inside here. There is the inside of our fuel tank, and there's still some dust coming out of it. So you can see that's one of the baffles inside the tank, and there's the other baffle between there and the fuel nozzle. So you can see from that the fuel tank on this car is in amazingly good shape for 50 years old. I don't understand it. I really don't. I don't understand how this fuel tank survived without rotting out, either from underneath or internally. I don't understand like why those J-bolts came off the way they did. Just came right off. Like had to struggle a little bit, but not anywhere near the amount that I deserve to. So I'm feeling pretty good about this car so far. The engine turns over. The fuel tank is cleaned out. There's nothing in the fuel tank that like scares me. Everything looks good. So the next step is going to be getting into the carburetors and making sure that the carburetors are cleaned out, because that's the next place that fuel would collect. So hopefully there's good news on the carburetor front, but you're going to have to wait until next week to find out about that. So we're getting much closer to firing this thing off for the first time. I'm expecting a few electrical issues given the scariness that's underneath the dash right now. But you're going to get to see that coming up too. So good news on the fuel tank means good news for probably the rest of the fuel system, and hopefully we just keep having good news. So with any luck, hopefully in a couple more weeks we'll be firing this car off and hearing it run for the first time in a very long time. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you to all the people that have subscribed to the channel in the past couple of weeks, and of course, until next time, get out there and work on something.